710 people. That's the entire population of a county in Nevada right now in 2026. The nearest hospital is 150 miles away, and an acre of land there costs less than a month's rent in any major American city. I know that sounds like the edge of civilization. It is. But Esmeralda County isn't an anomaly. It's the most extreme example of a pattern that stretches across at least 6 states. Counties with no zoning laws, no building permits, property taxes under $500 a year, and land at prices most Americans would assume were a database error. One county in Alabama lists raw acreage from $900. Another in Idaho had zoning on the books for years, and then voted to tear it up. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The regulatory system that controls where you can live, what you can build, and how much you pay every year for the privilege of standing on your own dirt, that system is not federal. It's not even state. It's county by county, parish by parish. And in a handful of places scattered across at least 6 states, from the deep south to the high desert, that system barely exists. These aren't anarchist fantasies. They're real jurisdictions with real land listings on LandSearch and Land.com right now. The locals in these places have been living this way for generations. They don't call it off-grid living, they just call it living. And the reason you've never heard of most of these counties is exactly the reason they stayed this way. Deep in the pine and hardwood interior of Mississippi, roughly halfway between Tupelo and Starkville, there's a county with around 10,300 residents spread across nearly 600 square miles of rolling timberland. Webster County doesn't show up on relocation guides. It doesn't trend on real estate TikTok. There's no cute downtown to photograph, no brewery scene, no Airbnb gold rush. What there is, instead, is an almost total absence of the regulatory framework that most Americans assume exists everywhere. Outside the tiny incorporated towns, and tiny means populations measured in 3 digits, there is no county zoning in Webster County. No zoning map, no zoning board, no zoning hearing you need to attend with a lawyer to beg permission to put a shed on your own land. On unincorporated parcels, building permits are not required. You buy the land, you build on the land. The relationship between you and your property is direct and unmediated by a bureaucratic layer that in most American counties adds months of delay and thousands of dollars in fees before a single foundation is poured. And the price of entry is lower than most Americans would believe. According to LandSearch listings from 2025 into 2026, a parcel near the community of Manti, 9.7 acres of unrestricted land, listed at $31,008. That works out to roughly $3,200 per acre. Property tax on raw land in Webster County runs under $500 a year. That's not the monthly payment, that's the annual bill. For context, the average American homeowner pays over $2,800 a year in property taxes alone, and they still don't own the mineral rights. The landscape here is deep southern small county rural in the truest sense. Hunting camps tucked back in longleaf pine stands, gravel roads that don't appear on Google Maps until you zoom in 3 times. Forestry and timber are the economic backbone, which means the economy is slow, seasonal, and not hiring. That's the honest drawback. Jobs in Webster County are scarce. The median household income sits well below the state average, and Mississippi already has one of the lowest median incomes in the nation. The nearest Walmart might be a 30-minute drive, a specialist doctor an hour or more. But for someone with remote income, a pension, or savings earmarked for raw land and self-sufficiency, the math here is hard to argue with. Under $500 a year in property tax, no permits, no zoning restrictions, land at prices that most Americans would associate with a bad joke, Webster County isn't a place where freedom is marketed. It's a place where freedom is what's left over when everything else leaves. And it's not the only county in the Deep South operating this way. Louisiana doesn't call them counties, it calls them parishes. And Bienville Parish, tucked into the north-central piney woods about 80 miles east of Shreveport, operates under a structure that outsiders rarely encounter. Sparse zoning, no permits required on many rural tracts, and a property tax rate of 0.32%, among the lowest in all of Louisiana, which already ranks as one of the lower tax states in the country. 13,700 people live across Bienville Parish's roughly 820 square miles. That's roughly 17 people per square mile. For comparison, the New York City borough of Manhattan packs around 72,000 people into each square mile. Bienville Parish is, by every measurable standard, empty. The landscape is dominated by commercial pine forest, tall, straight rows of loblolly pine planted for timber harvest, broken up by creeks, small clearings, and the occasional deer stand. This is hunting country, always has been. The land transactions here are driven more by deer lease economics and timber investment than by residential real estate in any conventional sense. According to land search listings from 2025 and 2026, a parcel of roughly 35 acres of raw pine forest land was available for $87,000. That's approximately $2,400 per acre. Raw, unimproved, no utilities, no road frontage guaranteed, but also no zoning overlay, no planning commission, no architectural review board sending you a letter because your mailbox is the wrong shade of grey. Here's the honest trade-off, and it's a significant one. The nearest hospital is about 25 miles away. If you're having a cardiac event on your back 40 at 2 in the morning, the ambulance response time is not going to be what you're used to in suburban America. Emergency services in Bienville Parish are stretched thin across a vast, underpopulated territory. That's the cost of regulatory absence. When the government is minimal, so are the services the government provides. You're not paying for much, you're not getting much. The equation is clean, but it's not painless. The locals here don't think of their parish as forgotten. They think of it as unbothered, which is what they prefer. Ask anyone running a hunting camp in Bienville, and they'll tell you the same thing. The best thing about this place is that nobody from the state ever shows up unless you call them. For some people, that's isolation. For others, that's the entire point. And Bienville Parish isn't even the cheapest land in this list, not by a long distance. If the first two counties on this list are defined by what they lack, zoning, permits, expensive land, Coosa County is defined by something harder to quantify. This is not a county that accidentally ended up without zoning. This is a county where the absence of regulation is woven into the social fabric so deeply that residents don't even frame it as freedom. They frame it as normalcy. Coosa County sits in east-central Alabama, about an hour southeast of Birmingham. Around 10,300 people live here across roughly 650 square miles of hilly, forested terrain. The Tallapoosa River cuts through the eastern portion, and much of the county is defined by thick mixed forest, red clay ridges, and gravel roads that wind through hollows where some families have lived for 5 or 6 generations. There is zero county zoning in Coosa County, not reduced zoning, not simplified zoning. Zero. Building permits in the rural, unincorporated areas are minimal, and off-grid living is not just legal, it's common practice. It's normalised. The guy down the road runs solar panels and a rainwater catchment system, and nobody considers that unusual because his grandfather did something similar before solar panels existed. The self-sufficiency culture here predates the modern off-grid movement by about a century. Land prices reflect the low demand. According to Land.com listings from 2025 into 2026, small rural parcels were available in the single-digit thousands per acre, with larger tracts pushing the per-acre cost even lower. You're not going to find a manicured 5-acre ranchette with a paved driveway. What you will find is raw, forested, hilly land, where the nearest paved road might be a mile of gravel away, and the nearest neighbour might be a quarter-mile through the trees. The honest drawback is economic stagnation. Coosa County's economy is thin, very thin. Employment opportunities within the county are limited to small-scale farming, forestry, and a handful of local service jobs. If you don't bring your income with you, remote work, disability, retirement, savings, you're going to struggle. There's no sugarcoating that. The county has been losing population slowly but steadily, and the infrastructure reflects it. Roads are maintained but not expanded. Broadband internet is spotty outside the main corridors. Cell service drops out in the hollows. But here's what makes Coosa County different from almost every other low-regulation county on this list. The culture doesn't just tolerate self-sufficiency, it expects it. When you move to Coosa County and tell your neighbor you're putting up a cabin with hand tools and running it on solar, the response isn't curiosity or concern. It's a nod, maybe a recommendation for where to get your lumber milled. The regulatory absence here isn't a gap in the system. It's the system working exactly as the residents want it to. And the land next door is even cheaper. $900 an acre. Let that number sit for a second. In a country where the average acre of land sells for over $12,000, Perry County, Alabama, is listing raw land parcels, real parcels, on real platforms from $900 per acre. According to LandSearch, rural listings from 2025 into 2026, tracts of around 30 acres were available in the high thousands of dollars. Not per acre, total. I know that sounds like a misprint. It's not. Perry County sits in Alabama's Black Belt, a geographic and cultural region named for its dark, fertile soil. The same soil that once made this area one of the richest cotton-producing zones in the antebellum South. The wealth left, the soil stayed. And so did about 8,500 people, scattered across a county of roughly 720 square miles. That's roughly 12 people per square mile. The rolling farmland stretches out in every direction, broken by stands of hardwood and the slow curves of creeks that feed into the Cahaba River system. There is no county zoning in Perry County. Building permits are minimal to non-existent in the unincorporated areas, which is most of the county. Off-grid living is explicitly legal, and in practical terms, it's the default for a significant portion of rural residents. The infrastructure to be on-grid simply doesn't reach many of these parcels. You're not choosing off-grid as a lifestyle statement. You're choosing it because the power line ends 2 miles before your property starts. The drawbacks here are not subtle. They are fundamental. Services are virtually non-existent. The county seat of Marion has a small-town commercial core, but outside it, you are on your own in a way that most Americans have never experienced. Grocery stores are sparse. Medical care requires a drive that, depending on where your parcel is, could exceed 45 minutes. The local economy has been in structural decline for decades. There is no industry coming to save Perry County. There is no tech company scouting locations here. The population trend line points in one direction, and it has for a long time. But the land itself is not worthless. It's fertile. It grows things. The Black Belt soil is genuinely some of the best agricultural earth in the southeastern United States. If your plan involves growing food, raising animals, and building a life that doesn't depend on a county payroll or a corporate salary, Perry County offers the raw materials at a price point that makes coastal Americans physically uncomfortable. At $900 an acre, you could buy a 30-acre homestead for less than many Americans spend on a single month of rent in a coastal city. That's not hyperbole, that's arithmetic. And all of this is before we leave the Southeast entirely. Every county we've discussed so far simply never had zoning. They grew up rural, stayed rural, and the bureaucratic apparatus never arrived. Washington County, Idaho is different. Washington County had zoning, had it on the books, enforced it, operated under it for years, and then, in 2013, the county formally rescinded its own zoning ordinance. Let that register. This isn't a county that forgot to regulate. This is a county that looked at its regulations, held a public process, and chose, deliberately, on the record, to tear them up. Washington County sits in southwestern Idaho, south of the small city of Weiser, bordered by Oregon to the west. Around 10,200 people live here, across nearly 1,500 square miles of canyon country, sagebrush benchlands, and irrigated river valley. The Snake River forms part of its western boundary, carving deep through basalt canyons that glow copper and rust in the late afternoon light. This is high desert ranch country, big sky, thin air, and the kind of emptiness that either terrifies you or makes you feel like you can finally breathe. The 2013 decision to rescind the zoning ordinance wasn't ideological theatre, it was practical. The county's residents, ranchers, small farmers, rural homeowners, had increasingly viewed the zoning code as an obstacle to land use rather than a protection of it. Compliance costs were high relative to income levels. Enforcement was uneven, and the benefits, in a county this sparsely populated, were hard to articulate. So they got rid of it. one of the very few counties in the entire United States to actively reverse an existing zoning law rather than simply never having adopted one. That distinction matters. It means the deregulation was a choice, not an accident. According to land search listings from 2025 and 2026, small rural parcels of 5 to 10 acres in the unincorporated zones were available in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. That's higher per acre than the Deep South counties on this list, and the reason is simple. This is Idaho. The state has experienced significant in-migration over the past decade, and even the remote counties have felt upward price pressure. You're not getting $900 an acre black belt deals here. What you're getting is something arguably more valuable, a documented, deliberate policy decision to leave landowners alone. The drawbacks are geographic and climatic. Washington County gets cold, real cold. Winter temperatures drop well below zero, and the growing season is short. The nearest significant hospital is in Ontario, Oregon, or possibly Boise, depending on where you are in the county. Either way, it's a drive. Snow can close secondary roads for days. If you're planning off-grid in Washington County, you'd better plan for winter as a survival event, not a season. But the residents who pushed for the 2013 zoning repeal didn't do it because the weather was easy. They did it because they believed, and still believe, that what you do on your own land is your business. That's not a bumper sticker sentiment in Washington County. It's codified policy. And in an era when most American counties are adding regulations, not removing them, that makes this place something close to a living experiment in voluntary deregulation. What comes next makes Washington County look almost urban. 40 acres, $25,000. Those are the numbers. According to Land.com listings from 2025 into 2026, you can buy 40 acres of open land in Millard County, Utah for $25,000. Larger parcels, 70-plus acres, were listed in the $60,000 to $65,000 range. 40 acres for the price of a mid-range used car. You'd think that's a typo. It's not. Go check Land.com yourself. Millard County occupies the western central part of Utah, stretching from the edge of the Great Basin Desert toward the Nevada border. This is basin and range country, vast alkaline flats interspersed with low mountain ridges, sagebrush plains that run unbroken to the horizon, and a sky so wide it makes you feel small in a way that no photograph can replicate. 13,500 people live here, most of them clustered in or near the towns of Delta and Fillmore along Interstate 15 and US Route 50. Step away from those corridors and the human presence drops to effectively zero. You can stand on your 40 acres and turn 360 degrees and see nothing built by human hands, except, possibly, a fence line. Zoning in Millard County is almost non-existent in the rural zones. Permits are waived for small structures. Off-grid homesteads are not just tolerated, they're common. Drive the back roads of Millard County and you'll see them. Solar panels on shipping container homes, rainwater tanks, composting systems, small wind turbines lashed to telephone poles. These aren't Instagram off-grid influencers staging content. These are people who live here year-round, because this is where they can afford to live without anyone telling them how. The freedom per dollar ratio in Millard County is, by any reasonable calculation, the most extreme in this entire data set. For $25,000, you get 40 acres with virtually no regulatory oversight, no zoning board, no building department breathing down your neck about setback distances and roof pitch angles, no HOA, obviously. The concept of a homeowners association in Millard County is as foreign as a subway system. Here's the brutal honesty. Water is scarce. This is desert. Not the romantic desert of Arizona tourism brochures. This is dry, alkaline, wind-blasted basin floor where annual rainfall barely hits 8 inches in a good year. You will need to drill a well or haul water. Either option costs money and effort. The nearest anything, grocery store, gas station, medical clinic, could be 30, 40, 50 miles from your parcel depending on location. Summer heat pushes past 100 degrees. Winter nights drop below zero. The wind doesn't stop. It just changes direction. And yet, people live here. People choose this. They choose the silence, the space, and the absolute absence of anyone with a clipboard asking to see their permit. The land is cheap because most Americans look at 40 acres of alkali flat and see nothing. The people who move to Millard County look at it and see the one thing that costs a fortune everywhere else in America: the right to be left alone. But if Millard County is the edge, the next place is what's past it. 710 people. That is the entire population of Esmeralda County, Nevada, as of the most recent counts heading into 2026. Not 710,000, not 7,100, 710. In one of the geographically largest counties in Nevada, covering over 3,500 square miles of high desert basin, alkaline playas, and jagged mountain ranges that look like they were dropped onto the landscape by a careless god. This is, by any measurable standard, one of the least populated counties in the entire continental United States. And if you're wondering what it looks like when a government simply doesn't exist because there's almost nobody left to govern, Esmeralda County is your answer. There's no zoning to speak of because there's no one to zone. There are no building permits to pull because there's no building department to pull them from. The regulatory infrastructure that Americans assume operates universally, inspectors, code enforcement, planning commissions, design review boards, none of it exists here in any functional sense. Not because someone voted it away, because there's no critical mass of humanity to sustain it. The county seat is Goldfield. That name used to mean something. In the early 1900s, Goldfield was a boomtown of roughly 20,000 people, driven by one of the last great gold rushes in American history. Saloons, hotels, a stock exchange, a championship boxing ring that hosted the Gans-Nelson fight in 1906. For a few years, Goldfield was one of the most important cities in Nevada. And then the gold played out, the water table dropped, fires swept through, and the population collapsed in a spiral that never reversed. Today, Goldfield has fewer than 300 residents. The grand buildings are mostly gone. A few stone and brick shells remain, standing in the desert like monuments to the impermanence of everything. According to Land.com listings from 2025 and 2026, undeveloped desert land in Esmeralda County was available at $1,000 to $2,500 per acre. Raw, unimproved, no utilities, no water, no road in many cases, just coordinates on a map and a deed that says you own a piece of the American desert floor. At those prices, the cost of the land itself is almost negligible. The real cost is what it takes to live on it. And here's where the honest conversation gets very honest. The nearest real hospital is in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is approximately 150 miles south, a 3-hour drive on a good day with no traffic delays and no construction. If you have a medical emergency in Esmeralda County, a rattlesnake bite, a broken leg, a stroke, you are looking at a helicopter evacuation or a very, very long ambulance ride. There is no urgent care. There is no walk-in clinic. There is, for practical purposes, no medical infrastructure within the county. This is the ultimate trade-off. Maximum freedom, minimum safety net. The government isn't cracking down on your land use because the government, in any meaningful sense, isn't here. Cell service is unreliable to non-existent outside Goldfield. Internet options are satellite only for most of the county. Grocery shopping requires a trip that, round trip, could eat up 4 hours and a quarter tank of gas. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 105 degrees on the basin floor. Winter brings freezing nights and winds that scream across the playas with nothing to stop them for 50 miles. The terrain looks like another planet. White alkaline flats, purple ridgelines, silence so total it hums. Star fields at night so dense they look artificial. But beauty doesn't keep you warm, doesn't pump your water, and doesn't call an ambulance. This is what freedom looks like when it's not a policy position. It's what's left when everything else has been stripped away: the people, the economy, the infrastructure, the government itself. Esmeralda County doesn't market itself as free. It doesn't market itself at all. There's no one left to do the marketing. But if your definition of freedom is the absolute, unqualified ability to stand on a piece of ground that belongs to you and do whatever you want with no human authority within 100 miles telling you otherwise, this is the place. It exists. it has a name. And right now, in 2026, you can buy a piece of it for less than you'd pay to park a car in Manhattan for a year. Every county on this list exists for the same reason. Not because someone designed a freedom zone, because the economic and demographic forces that build regulatory systems never arrived here, or arrived and left. The question isn't whether you'd want to live in places like these. The question is whether you even knew they existed before right now. Which one would you actually move to if your income was remote and your only requirement was being left alone? Tell me in the comments, and if this is the kind of content you want, real places, real numbers, no filters, subscribe. There are more of these. Nobody else is making this list.